We finally made it to the last mini lesson of our packet. So our last mini lesson is how do we solve equations with the degree of 2? So that means when I have an x squared in my equation, so in order to figure that out, we need to know what the inverse of a degree 2 is. So when I'm taking the inverse, I'm actually taking the square root. And the square root is this symbol. It looks a little bit like this. So what does the square root actually do? Well, if I have an equation x squared is equal to 16, then I know that x has to be equal to a positive 4 or a negative 4. So we call that plus or minus, this weird little plus or minus symbol, 4. This means that I have a positive 4 or a negative 4. So this one symbol takes into account both of them. Why does that happen? Because if I try to check with positive 4, let's try and plug that in. So I have 4 squared is equal to 4 times 4 if I expand out 4 squared. 4 times 4 I know is equal to 16, so that one works. Let's try with a negative. So if I plug negative 4 into my equation, negative 4 squared is equal to negative 4 times negative 4, which again equals 16 because negative times negative equals positive. So let's talk about what steps we need to follow in order to solve equations with a degree of 2. So our first step, I need to use inverse operations to get my x squared alone. So we'll use inverse operations to isolate x squared. This is the same as what we would normally do if we just had an x. Let's look at in our example. If I have 5x squared is equal to 20, I have 5 multiplied by x squared. So to get x squared alone, I need to do the inverse of multiplication, which is division. So we'll divide both sides by 5. These 5's cancel, and I end up with x squared is equal to 20 divided by 5 is equal to 4. Our second step, once I have x squared alone, is to take the square root of both sides. So I'll rewrite over here x squared is equal to 4. And I want to take the square root of both sides. So I'm going to draw this little square root symbol on both sides of my equation. The square root of x squared is just x. And for now, I'm going to leave this as square root of 4, and we'll talk about how to evaluate that in our next step. So when I evaluate that, just like we talked about up above, I'm going to get this weird plus or minus. So we have to remember our third step will be to remember that the solution is plus or minus. So I know that the square root of 4 is 2. 2 times 2 is equal to 4. But what actually I need to write to get the correct answer is plus or minus 2. Because I can use a positive 2 or a negative 2, both will work for my equation. So let's go over this example. What is the solution set for the equation x squared minus 2 is equal to 23? So I'm going to rewrite down here. We'll start our equation. X squared minus 2 is equal to 23. According to the first step, I need to use inverse operations to isolate x squared. So I have x squared minus 2. The operation between x squared and 2 is minus, which means the inverse is plus. So I need to add 2 to both sides. This negative 2 and positive 2 will cancel. So on the left-hand side, I end up with just x squared. And then on the right-hand side, I get 23 plus 2 is equal to 25. Now that I have isolated my x squared, I can take the square root of both sides. That's the second step in the procedure that we have from before. So I will take the square root of both sides. The square root of x squared is equal to x. So I know that x is equal to the square root of 25. Well, I'm not sure off the top of my head what the square root of 25 is. So I'm going to open up my Desmos calculator, the scientific calculator. And if I look at this calculator on the left-hand side, underneath main, underneath a squared, I have this little square root symbol. So that's what I'm going to click. And then I'm going to put in, just type in 2 and 5, and I get 25. So my answer is showing up on this right-hand side, so it's equal to 5. But I know that, I'll write in equals 5 over here, but I know that this answer isn't fully correct because step 3 is to remember that the solution is plus or minus. So I need to add, my calculator doesn't do it for me, it only gives me the positive version, but I know I need to also include that negative to have a full correct answer. And that's my final solution, but let's make sure before we move on that that's correct. So I have two solutions to check here. I'll plug in both a positive 5 to my equation and a negative 5 to my equation. So let's start with, this is my equation that I'm working with. Let's start with my skeleton of an equation. And I'm going to plug in those parentheses a positive 5 and a negative 5. So we'll start with a positive 5. So 5 squared minus 2 is equal to 23. I'll expand out this 5 squared, so I have 5 times 5 minus 2 is equal to 23, and I know that 5 times 5 is equal to 25. So I can put in 25 minus 2 is equal to 23, which is correct. So I know my positive 5 works. Now let's try with our negative 5. So negative 5 squared minus 2 is equal to 23. So I have negative 5 times negative 5 minus 2 is equal to 23. We just said that 5 times 5 is 25, but I have these negatives. So what's negative times a negative? Well, I'll still end up with a positive. So I end up with positive 25 minus 2 is equal to 23. So both of my solutions work.